Hello, dear friends. Lyrics of a very moving song by Carmen Paris. In quotes, what happened to humanity that it can no longer feel? Because it is afraid of death, it has stopped living. Smiles were hidden, hugs were avoided, friends and even parents and siblings distanced themselves. The outings, the rites and traditions, the parties, the dances and the songs are over. What happened to humanity? The elderly were abandoned, the infants were subdued, the lost were profaned, the thinking people were punished, terrified and suffocated people do time believing that the enemy can hide in anyone. Where does humanity go if they forbid to be happy? It cannot be natural to hold your nose. Nothing can be changed if you don't start with you. It's time to wake up, get up and decide. By being afraid of death, you have stopped living. Close quotes. Opinion piece. Compassion is growing. It's not pity but empathy. It is a sign of spiritual evolution. Pity has no generosity. Humanitarian sentiment grows. It is a time of mourning for many. It consists of weeping with those who weep. It seeks practical solutions. It's to desire deliverance from suffering. Ra.hmân means the Merciful One. Compassion is the basis of Buddhism. Every living being deserves this solidarity. Liberation from the suffering of all. Charity is the basis of Christianity. Send love and healing to the victims. Truth will always come to the surface. The negative comes to the surface to be healed. This kind of piety is seen as offensive in the West. Today's world does not recognize modern mystics. Every being is a divine particle wrapped in human flesh. Indignant compassion for lack of honor is very Spanish. Let's start. Humanity is compassion for other people's misfortunes. Compassion is a feeling of pity, tenderness, and identification with someone's ills. A humanitarian being is benign, charitable, and beneficent, looks to the good of mankind and aims to alleviate the effects caused by war or other calamities on the people who suffer them. Compassion literally means to suffer together with empathy. It is a human feeling that manifests itself from the contact and understanding of the suffering of another being. More intense than empathy, compassion is the perception and understanding of the suffering of the other, and the desire and action to alleviate, reduce or completely eliminate such painful situation. It is a feeling that arises from seeing someone suffer and that prompts one to alleviate their pain or suffering, to remedy it or to avoid it, such as having compassion for the less fortunate. Buddhism has made this feeling its own spiritual attitude. Every living being deserves this compassion. Every being is basically a divine particle wrapped in human flesh. This solidarity, infinitude, or neediness. Compassion can be associated with feelings of power. This allows us to understand that in the West today, this kind of pity has been seen as offensive. In quotes, I don't want you to pity me, is often replied. In this sense, Aristotle already noted that human beings feel compassion for those who suffer without deserving it. Monotheism or Semitic origin, such as Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, have placed great value on divine compassion or mercy. For the great Marcion, Sufi master Ibn al-Arabi, the real name of God is Ra.hmân, meaning the merciful. Definition. Buddhism has made a feeling of compassion its own spiritual attitude. Every living being deserves this caring pity, this solidarity. Buddhism defines compassion as the wish for all beings to be free from suffering. Compassion is the essence of a spiritual life and the main practice of those who dedicate their lives to the attainment of enlightenment. Compassion is the wish for others to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. It is based on valuing the feelings of others, especially when we have experienced the same difficulties. Compassion is a form of empathy and affection whose desire is the relief of someone's suffering. Compassion is not a feeling of commiseration and pity felt toward those who suffer hardship, but rather that feeling of empathy and equanimity based on reason toward all living beings. Pity is anything that causes displeasure, but not solidarity or generosity. Chenrezig, Avalokiteshvara or Canon, is the deity of compassion in Mahayana Buddhism, syncretized with the figure of the Mother Goddess, giving rise to the Buddhist Bodhisattva Kuan Yin. According to Tibetan tradition, Chenrezig's compassionate gaze protectors or guards all sentient beings, especially those who invoke him, and even more so if they do so with true devotion. In this sense, Chenrezig is similar to the guardian angel of the Christian tradition, or the Egyptian Eye of Horus, to mention just two examples. Chenrezig and other Buddhist deities are not really gods of a polytheistic pantheon, but spiritual or angelic beings. They are human beings who have developed the joyful body of Sambhogakaya. In the case of Chenrezig, it is the archetype of Buddhist compassion, a concept that we can assimilate to that of neighborly love, with the only difference that in the Buddhist case the neighbor also includes all sentient beings such as higher animals and even insects. As with the angels, who are represented with wings, these deities are usually represented with special characteristics, such as multiple arms of faces. However, it should be emphasized that these representations are relative, and thus the same deity can be represented in different ways. In the story of Chenrezig, it is said that when he took ordination, he promised to guide all beings to enlightenment from behind like a muleteer with his sheep. Thus he worked for a long time, guiding many beings, but when he looked around him, he were still many more missing, and every time he stopped to observe, there were many more missing. Then, so great was his desire to be able to help more and more beings, that he split himself into 11 human beings, and 1,000 arms came out of him, so that he could help many more beings. The most common representation of Chenrezig is that in which its color is glowing white and has 4 arms. He is seated in lotus position, with 2 hands that meet at the level of the heart. These same hands hold the Chitamani jewel, which is a philosopher's stone with the ability to grant wishes to the wearer. His other 2 hands, respectively, hold the rosary and the lotus flower. Charity. Charity is an attitude of solidarity with the suffering of others. It is a theological virtue that consists in loving God above all things, and one's neighbor as oneself. The fruits of charity are joy, peace, and mercy. It demands the practice of goodness and fraternal correction. It is benevolence. It is reciprocity. It is always disinterested and generous. It is friendship and communion. Paul of Tarsus affirmed that compassion is laughing with those who laugh and weeping with those who weep, linking the value of compassion with the idea of sharing. The feeling of compassion has been associated with a feeling of pity in the face of the misfortune caused by the pain of another. However, solidarity is a positive attitude of generosity and care for others. It is psychologically incomprehensible without the motive of compassion. The Spanish language has coined a chivalrous or quixotic expression related to honor or social honor to designate a type of indignant compassion for the lack of dignity or individual honor of those who suffer, or rather, suffer ridicule, misery, injustice, or vileness without anyone to solve it, since honor demands that no one be dishonored by corporate honor or esprit de corps. The English already observed this cultural peculiarity when they coined a formula that described it as Spanish aim. In Spanish culture, the bonds of sympathy are very intense, and the fear of losing dignity or pride is very pronounced, and the last piece of food in a shared ration is that of shame. Catharsis. My Kinsey's higher self message. These times are very unsettling, but the negative must suffice to be glorified. For too long they have dictated how your life should progress, and at the same time hide the truth to keep you in their clutches. The truth will always surface, and it cannot be withheld indefinitely. God punishes no one and still loves his creations beyond measure. Almighty God is beyond comprehension. That love is God's presence in all that knows no end. Yet for all God's greatness, the humblest prayer is heard and answered, for God knows each of you personally and is with you all the time. You will find that moving more into the light is a wonderful experience, as with it comes a greater level of consciousness. You will have abilities that you would not have thought possible, and become a very independent soul. Life would be spent mainly in the galaxy, with no restrictions as to where your travels take you. Evolution Signal. Arcturian Council 90 through Daniel Scranton. It serves no purpose to look at the conflict between Russia and Ukraine with consent and fear, but we also know that there are many human beings who look at that struggle with compassion, love, and who offer healing to all beings involved. We know that you become more compassionate and look for ways in which you can help when you become aware of war, bombings, shootings, poverty, natural disasters, and all kinds of injustices. This is a sign of your spiritual evolution. This is what is needed on earth right now, and is what has always been needed: compassion. Therefore, we invite all of you who are awake and who know that you are there to help, to send your love, your healing, your compassion, and to provide a space for the human beings who are affected by the struggles that people in Ukraine are going through, as well as sending as much love as you can to the people in Russia who are caught in the middle of something that they themselves have no interest in. When you have a situation where people simply have to fight each other, it's important to feel something for those human beings and to know that it's not the soldiers' fault. Have compassion for the civilians and for those who you would consider victims in any situation. But it is also important to know that in a war situation there are many victims. Even those who drop the bombs or fire the guns have to follow orders or face terrible consequences, and they have their guilt and shame to carry with them for the rest of their lives. So you might as well send your love, your healing, and your compassion to all those involved in the fighting between Russia and Ukraine. And know that it is your way to do this. It is your purpose to be one of those sending that positive energy, and it is not your place to decide who is right and who is wrong. This is not the time to get caught up in conspiracy theories about what is really going on. All those mental gymnastics don't involve you one bit. But when human beings go inside their heart and transmit love where it's needed most at any time in history, we see a huge evolution, and that's what we are looking for a time like this. That's what we see the most, and that's why we are so encouraged by what we see when we tune into the consciousness of humanity. Frustration. The Arcturian group through Marilyn Raphael. We honor each and every one of you and are fully aware of your frustration with the seemingly slow pace of change and the disturbing situations that occur all over the world that are basically a divine particle wrapped in human flesh. However, know that all of this became clear to you before you decided to incarnate, and yet you eagerly desired to be part of Earth's ascension process. You knew that your light and consciousness would be needed and that the incoming higher energies would make it the perfect opportunity to clear the remaining old energy for you. Know that all is proceeding according to plan, regardless of how it may appear from appearances. It is a process and cannot happen overnight. A great deal of old energy is currently being removed from the earth itself all over the world, especially in lands that have been inhabited for a long time. Energies formed from centuries of war, domination, strife, fighting, poverty, and all kinds of violence are now surfacing in areas that desperately need cleansing. Dictators and others in positions of power are beginning to feel the power they have always enjoyed awakening, feeling threatened without knowing why. Fear is causing some of them to lash out in brutal ways that represent their state of consciousness. However, these old forms are quickly becoming obsolete because the energies that have maintained and sustained their belief are beginning to dissolve and will continue to do so as more light penetrates the collective consciousness. Time of mourning. It's a time of mourning for many, a time when both the waking and the sleeping are experiencing a sense of unidentified sadness. As the familiar begins to fade, it causes fear to the unknown in those who do not know that there are new and better ways to come. So they continue to believe that, as disturbing and painful as some of the old ways were, they are the right ways. Many of you simply feel that this energy is not yours. You will find yourselves increasingly called upon to help those who are drawn to you with questions and concerns. They recognize your stability in the face of outer experiences and want this for themselves. They will become teachers of those who are ready for the truth and seek it. However, even more important than the outer work is the inner work, your ability to continually and quietly be the light that you are, because without the inner there can no outer. Modern mysticism. Mysticism is an attained awareness of oneness that is lived automatically even when ordinary human steps must be followed. The world in general does not recognize modern mystics because they live, work, have families, and seem to be like everyone else. In general, the world still thinks of mystics as they have been depicted in holy gods, works of art, statues, etc. Eyes closed, hands folded, and bright light around the head. You who are awake, living in the world, but not of it, are the mystics of today. The mystical life is a life of detachment from much of what occupies three-dimensional thinking, and therefore those who live it are often considered indifferent and called by those who live fully in the three-dimensional belief system. Being a modern mystic never interferes with being loving and warm, but rather embodies the very essence of these things. Mysticism is what you have been preparing for throughout your many lifetimes of spiritual search, questioning, study, and practice. Nothing, no ritual, practice, prayer, class, crystal, oil, mantra group, guru, or teacher can leave you what you already have or make what you already are. Spiritual tools can help because they carry their own energy, many of them being highly resonant. When you align yourself with the energy of certain crystal or oils, etc., you can temporarily elevate yourself to their level, but it will always be temporary because your own state of consciousness is what governs you. Every being is basically a divine particle wrapped in human flesh. A wake up. Very soon you will be fully awakened by Saul through John Smallman. To awaken is to delight fully in the eternal wonder of the now, the eternal joy and satisfaction of life, which can only be the now. You are omniscient, not because your infinite mind is full of knowledge, but because you have full access now, not later, not next week, not next year, to everything that interests you. There is nothing to learn because you know everything. Awake, you are omniscient. Asleep, you are assenting, confused, limited, and lost. Being fully awake, fully aware, is your natural state. You can't be distracted or stray from this moment. The only moment when your awareness is always fully attentive to everything. That is why you receive an instant response every time you call your spiritual support teams, saints or guides, in the non-physical realms. They are always there for you, for everyone. When you are awake, there is nothing you cannot attend to instantaneously. Nothing is lost, delayed, or forgotten. Everything you choose to attend is always attended to now. There can never be a state of circumstance or a situation in which a response from you must be delayed, adjusted, limited, or rejected. You are always able to respond perfectly to whatever arises immediately. You are now completely one with Source, with all there is. That state is immutable and eternal. It is infinite joy. Impact. Why is everything taking so long by glasnost? These days, many people are impatient. Everyone wants to see change. After all, we humans suffer from tyranny, lies, and fear in an ever life-threatening world. A new world was promised where there would be prosperity and joy. It is true that the process of change to obtain that world is still slow. However, let us look at the present situation from a spiritual point of view. Every being is basically a divine particle wrapped in human flesh. Our lives are spent on a prison planet, and also in duality with a veil of separation. So we know nothing about previous lives. If you now look at this planet from the higher dimensions, it is said that you didn't have to go this planet. You yourself wanted to learn and experience certain things. To experience what it is like to live in a world with pervasive evil accompanied by oppression, tyranny, poverty, disease, adversity, natural disasters, etc. How does this process work now? Ultimately, each soul must become the God that it is. To do this, each soul has to travel the path with learning processes and various examinations. As far as Earth is concerned, this means living many dozens of lives in different capacities, sometimes male, sometimes female, sometimes poor, sometimes rich, sometimes with a different religion, etc. Ultimately, the learning process must lead to a dimension jump, in this case from the third to the fifth dimension, passing through the fourth where we are now, in which the being becomes a kind of superhuman. This means that we go back from 2 to 12 plus 1 DNA strands and recover the remaining 90% of the unused brain capacity that was disassembled by the Anunnaki in the distant past. That was dismantled. This transition is done through a test at an end time. An end time doesn't mean that the world perishes, but that the world transitions to a higher dimension. This examination means to take a leap of consciousness, to take a leap of faith, to know what is going on around you, and to deal with difficult issues with love. Why love? Because otherwise there can be no universe. This development up to the dimension leap all happens in a cycle that lasts 26,000 years. Then everything starts all over again. Then those who have not passed their exam will only get another chance. This kind of cycles were counted by the Mayan people through the famous Hub calendar. They count cycles of 26,000 years, after which the counter jumps back to zero. And that's all for today. Thanks a lot, dear friends.